Thank you. And it would be remiss of me not to acknowledge that two of our members at least have had birthdays in the month of July. I just don't understand what it is about July.
Great month. Great month. Great month.
Senator Aubin Hill and Senator Longmore both celebrated birthdays in this auspicious month. I guess it has something to do with the mango season. I don't know. Statement by ministers. Announcements.
Laid on the table of the Senate today are the following. Minister Paper number 35, entitled The National Water Sector Policy and Implementation Plan 2019. The National Water Sector Policy and Implementation Plan 2019. Minister Paper number 36, entitled Annual Reports and Financial Statements of the National Irrigation Commission for the year ended March 31, 2015. Annual Reports and Financial Statements for the National Irrigation Commission for the year 2015. Minister Paper number 37, entitled Strategic Review of Petroleum Limited. Minister Paper number 38, entitled Minister of Education, Youth and Information 2019 sitting of the primary exit profile.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Bills brought from the Honourable House of Representatives. There are none. Petitions. Papers. Reports from committees. Notices of motions given orally. Questions and answers to questions. Minister Charles, you have my permission to address this this item from a seat other than your own.
Beautiful, Mr. President. And just to indicate to Mr. Brown that I just this morning have received information which I will be going over. So I anticipate that by as soon as next week, you'll get a comprehensive response to your questions.
Thank you very much. Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to the sitting of the Senate. Motions for leave to introduce bills. The presentation of bills without the leave of the Senate first obtained. Public business.
Mr. President, I'm grateful. Last week, we started the debate on the Petroleum Amendment Act 2019, and it is our intention for us to invite the senators to make their contribution to this debate. Thereafter, subsequent to closing that, to move to the Bauxite and Alumina Industries Encouragement Amendment Act 2019. So at this time, Mr. President, just to remind senators that the bill before us, the Petroleum Amendment Act 2019, referred directly to the integration of the functions of the Petro-Caribbean Development Fund into the Ministry of Finance and transfer of the rights and obligations of that fund to the government of Jamaica. At this time, Mr. President, we invite our colleague senators to contribute to the debate.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Brown, thank you.
Mr. President, the bill before us seeks to amend the Petroleum Act by repealing a particular part of that act in respect to the integration of the functions of the Petro-Caribbean Development Fund into central government. I'm not sure the point my friend was making earlier, But this also includes the liability and the assets of that fund. And in addressing this bill, I intend to speak to some of those issues. I'm also aware, Mr. President, that this bill is a conditionality of the IMF agreement entered into by this government, a continuation of the agreement started by our government, or the government of the administration that I am part of. So that this is necessary to meet IMF conditionality. And we will support that desire. We don't want you to fail any IMF test. Even though you used to complain that all we did was to pass the IMF test and not the people's test. And we want to see how well this IMF conditionality works for the people. Mr. President, where does this fund came from? In around 2005, during his budget presentation, when Jamaica was being battered by the situation in the world oil market, former Prime Minister P.J. Patterson, speaking in this chamber, made a profound statement. He said, "Good friend, better than pocket money." Very profound. Good friend, better than pocket money. He was speaking about the relationship between the government of Jamaica and the government of Venezuela, then led by Hugo Chavez. What P.J. Patterson spoke of, good friend better than pocket money, is the Petro-Carib agreement which Venezuela was about to enter into with Jamaica and other countries in the region. Mr. President, you may recall that the day when that agreement was to be signed in Montego Bay, those who read better than me chose to wage street demonstration and protest, burning tires in the street. Burning tires in the street. Fidel Castro was to come to Montego Bay. Hugo Chavez was to come to Montego Bay. This agreement was going to be a bad thing, they thought. That side was not in support of the Petro-Carib deal. Mr. President, I well recall also that good friend better than pocket money, but I remember a leader on that side who said the following in respect to our relationship with Venezuela. We must not sell out the foreign policy interests of Jamaica because of a few barrels of oil. Those are the words of Mr. Bruce Golding, then opposition leader. We must not sell out foreign policy interests of Jamaica because of a few barrels of oil. Mr. President, today, this Senate, through this bill, is being asked to advise and consent on $1.6 billion US, or over 208 billion Jamaican dollars, to be transferred from the Petro-Carib Development Fund into the budget of this government. 208 billion is approximately 26% of the budget for this year. So that's a big chunk of money coming from the Petro-Carib Development Fund into the Consolidated Fund of Jamaica. I'll come to that, Senator Knight. So that is coming to the budget. Senator Webby, that's the largest injection of funds into our budget for any time. And Mr. President, all I will say, this is a big, big barrel of oil that was worth selling out our foreign policy interests by defending a South arrangement, by displaying our progressive internationalism, which is where the PNP stood. It is the same approach to this Venezuelan deal that took us in 1974 to develop the relationship with Cuba, along with other Caribbean territory. And we paid a price in propaganda from the other side for being bold in opening up relationship with Cuba. Today, I hear this government say, we're getting 200 plus medical personnel, nurses and doctors from Cuba.
Oh boy.
It is okay now.
The Prime Minister
But
walked
then
into
it
the
was so
mountaintop
bad.
with the Cubans.
Mike, flight, Mike. Flight, Mike.
Bye-bye.
So, thank you, Matthew. Thank you. So, the legacy of the PNP in relationship to Cuba is paying dividend today. Yet we underwent criticism, unnecessarily so. The country was divided, and people were concerned that we were walking hand in hand to the mountaintop. Well, what a mountaintop we have arrived at 1.6 billion US dollars in investment. Mr. President, it's the same approach to this Venezuelan relationship that led us in 1974 to declare for the one China policy. And today, whoa, those who are embracing China, I asked where were they in the 70s when they were criticizing the relationship with China. So the PNP is proud that our progressive internationalism, scorned and mocked and jeered by the then opposition in the 70s, those initiatives are bearing fruit today for Jamaica. So this, when you stand on principle, you need no apology. When you stand on principle, you need no apology. So, Mr. President, this Petro-Carib Development Fund, 208 plus billion Jamaican dollars to be transferred to the budget, is part of the legacy of the People's National Party progressive approach to the economy. And we must recognize that. And it is useful when we erred in the past to say we were wrong in opposing the progressive internationalism advanced by Michael Manley, advanced by P.J. Paulson, and before them Norman Manley, advanced by Portia Simpson Miller, and being upheld by Dr. Peter Phillips today. No, I have to come to you on your attitude to the Petro-Carib Fund. I'm going to come to you on your attitude. So, Mr. President, this legacy of the PNP, yes, this legacy money that you're going to get, and which I hope you will not going to waste, right? This legacy is because of the progressive policies of the PNP, policies which they oppose. But, Mr. President, Senator Morris, no, well, they're getting it. They're getting it. But you know, it is not only this progressive internationalism, KD, that they are inheriting. They're inheriting the legacy program, the road works, and all of these things that we have done.
When you say they might think it's themselves.
But that's how they operate. That's how they operate. Mr. President, the best apology that one could ever get about the Petro-Carib, recognizing how it was opposed and fought against by the opposition then in the 70s, in the 2000s, and now, is a statement made in this Parliament on the 28th of April 2011. And I'm going to quote that statement, Mr. President, because we must know when we run out and criticize and condemn things, think before. Think before we criticize. Person speaking in the parliament spoke to the Petrocarib Development Fund, and he said, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker is what I would pronounce it as, but I think you know what I'm talking about when I say Mr. Speaker. During the fiscal year, the Petrocarib Development Fund, PDF, continued to play a pivotal role in financing the country's economic and social development. At March 31st, 2011, a total of 1.4 billion, or approximately Jamaica 120 billion, accrued to Jamaica under the agreement. This represents the largest source of concessional loan flows available to the government of Jamaica. The benefit to the public finance and to the macroeconomic program continue to be significant, and I take the opportunity once again to express our deep appreciation to President Hugo Chavez and the government of the people of Venezuela for their generosity. Those are the words of the Honourable then the Honourable Audley Shaw speaking in the budget debate about this Petrocarib deal. He went on to say, during 2010-2011 fiscal year, the fund dispersed a total of 10 billion in long-term loan financing to support a number of critical development priorities, such as the Port Authority, the UDC, the Exim Bank, NRAC, and others. So valuable as this fund, born in controversy caused by the opposition then, that they now come to praise while in government. Audley Shaw continued, the Petrocarib Fund will make available a total of Jamaican 28.5 billion in loan financing to central government and self-financing public bodies. That's in the fiscal year 2011-2012. The fund will also play a critical role in financing the implementation of two important programs, which are consistent with the National Development Strategy as articulated in 2030 National Development Plan. Spoke about the Student Loan Bureau benefiting and others. Community Redevelopment Program, Renewal Program benefited. Mr. President, there can be no doubt, absolutely no doubt, that the vision of P.J. Patterson, working with our brothers and sisters who were despised by others up north, has benefited Jamaica tremendously. JSIP and others have benefited from this. Educational opportunity for our children have come because of Petrocarib. So we are proud on this side of the role we played in moving Jamaica forward and in being principled in holding Fidel Castro on, in going to Algiers, in opening up relationship with China, in building South-South relationship, that Jamaica has benefited from our progressive internationalism. And so, Mr. President, we are happy that a windfall is coming to Jamaica, arising from our policies. Well, if you don't think 208 billion is a windfall, I can understand. Mr. President, the issue for us on this side, while we are not opposed to the transfer, is how well will this money be used? How well will this money be used? In the other place, during the debate on this bill, the member from North Clarendon, Mr. Horace Daly, asked the Minister of Energy whether any money from the Petrocarib was sent to the Caribbean Maritime University. I think the figure he asked is whether 400 million was sent to CMU. The minister, when she rose to respond, mentioned the question, but never answered. And so today in this Senate, as you seek our advice and consent on this bill, I also want to ask, was $400 million sent to CMU from the Petrocarib. And before Senator Sinclair said I didn't read well, I want you to know I read clause 4 that spoke about liabilities. I want to know if that money to CMU is a liability that has to be paid back. And who have to pay it back? Because, Mr. President, since the minister gave no answer then, I want to know, given what I've heard coming out of parliamentary committee and the CMU, whether or not we're operating through CMU a kickback scheme. Let me repeat it. Based on what I'm hearing coming out of the parliamentary committee, the PAAC, I want to know if any of this Petrocarib money is part of a kickback scheme to a particular former minister of government. Mr. President, the public is aware of strange payment through the CMU to a so-called, and I say so-called deliberately, a so-called household helper of the then minister, Royal Reid. I want to know if that almost $4 million, allegedly instructed to be paid to Ms. Doreen Miller, the so-called household helper of Minister Royal Reid, came out of any of that Petrocarib money that went to the CMU, the Caribbean Maritime University. It is important to know, Mr. President, and the people want answer to this. Did Ms. Doreen Miller receive even a single cent of that nearly $4 million? Mr. President, I don't need an answer from the government. Ms. Miller has spoken to me, and she said not a single cent of that came to her. She said
Senator
to me,
Brown, with the greatest of respect, if that be the case, maybe you need to give a statement to the PAC.
anybody want a statement,
to
come
the
and
police.
ask me for it.
But stick to
Anybody
the...
want a
Hang on,
statement,
man.
come and
Hold
ask
on,
me
Senator
for it.
Brown.
I am sticking to this
Brown,
bill.
hold on. For you to be getting up and saying that you interviewed the housekeeper, is not... well, whatever it is that she told you, just stick to the script, man. You get the point. Just stick to the script. Please, when I say stick to the script, I mean keep the thing relevant to the legislation before you. Let me just, I don't even know why I'm even intervening in it, because none of the senators that represent the government here are taking any objections. So go on, talk and say anything you want to say.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes, sir. Good ruling. Good ruling. That's how you preside.
Mr. President, the people of Jamaica, Mr. President, the people of Jamaica need to know, was the helper asked to open a bank account, but the bank card and the bank information
Senator
were
Brown.
controlled by a
Senator
family
Brown.
member
Mr.
of the
President,
minister.
1 minute. Well, Senator Brown, come on.
I think, Mr. President, a point of order. I think you, a while ago, just articulated the importance of not just sticking to the bill, but where this is a matter that is in the public domain being investigated. It is not in our
concerned
interest
about
to
what
have-
is being investigated or not. I'm dealing with the question of relevance. Senator Brown, such statements that you are making are not relevant to the debate, and I so rule. So move on.
Money was transferred on the phone to CMU.
Mr. President,
You know that?
this bill,
Relevance.
Clause 4 and other, and Clause 6B, speaks to liability of the fund. And I read those, and I'm therefore asking about the liability who has the liability for that money which went through CMU to this fund?
From the fund, CMU.
Because I'm aware that the account of Miss Miller that she opened was
Mr.
controlled by
President.
family members of the then
Mr.
minister.
President.
So I want to know who is
Point
going
of
to pay
order.
it back.
I know.
Senator Brown, I've already made a ruling in relation to this matter, and I'm asking you to move on. That is
Addition-
not relevant to the debate which is presently before us.
In addition,
If you
Mr.
want to deal with the I'm not recognizing you, Senator Brown. If you wish to deal with this issue, there are other ways to deal with it, but not in relation to this debate. And you are pushing the limit of it. Because it is not relevant to the debate, Senator Morris. That is why not.
Mr. President, if this bill speaks to liability of the Petrocarib fund, and Petrocarib pass money through to the CMU,
Is that true or not? Deny that.
how can it not be relevant?
You might not support the bill.
Mr. President, let us be clear. You and I know more than many people here know.
Yeah.
So let us appreciate that.
No draw out on us, sir.
But it is important that, that we don't blame
Yeah, protocol.
Doreen Miller for the
President.
Senator Brown.
CMU money.
Senator
President.
Brown. Senator Brown.
Yes. I have permission so to do. I have permission so to do. She wants her
Brown.
name clear.
Senator Brown.
Mr.
This is
President.
not.
Don't
This
tell
is
me you're new
not.
fight.
This is this debate. This debate is not the place for you to clear the lady's name, Senator.
The
yes.
point I want to make is that, in my view, and I submit it to you, sir, that is inappropriate for the senator to be detailing matters that are under investigation.
No.
They're not only details, but he's given particulars arising from his own investigation, which, in my view, could compromise an investigation that's being carried out, and it should not be permitted.
Senator Brown, I have made the ruling. So continue down that road at your peril.
Mr. President, I don't have fear. I don't have fear. In being transparent, I don't have fear. So let me ask you, are you ruling that I cannot speak on clause 4 in respect to payment of liabilities?
I'm not ruling that you cannot speak on it. What I'm ruling on, you are dealing with a specific issue. You are calling people's name. Listen to me now. Hold on, man. You are calling
stop you.
people's name who have not been convicted before in court. You are calling matters. You are calling names in a matter that the whole country know is under investigation, and you are going. But that's fine. And the PAC, so let the PAC deal with it. Not even the PAC deal with it in the way that Senator Brown is dealing with it.
President, in an attempt to understand, this is a matter that is being dealt with by a committee of the lower house, which is a parliamentary committee. And these are matters coming out of that committee. And this is a situation in which a nexus is being placed between that which the PAAC has been investigating in their own way, not in a criminal context, and a liability which belongs to the public through the process. So if it is that the member is making that linkage in the public interest and asking questions on behalf of the public and through information which the informant caused him to be able to use publicly, then it would be a denial of a public right to prevent him from going through the process. It would appear as if, whilst exposure is sought in the lower house, cover up is being practiced in the upper house. And that is something that I know that you as president would not want. And that is something I know that we on both sides would not want. And so I think public information, or information that the public would want, ought not to be stifled as long as the linkage is clear. And the linkage that Senator Brown has made between the payment, between the statutory provision as to liability, and as to the dissipation of public funds, then I think that we should have more than a passing interest in it.
I don't need any more submissions on this. And that is what that was. Senator Knight, I agree with everything that you have said. Everything. Save and accept to say that this is not the time or the place. We are dealing with a piece of legislation, and the linkage that you refer to, I think, was covered when a particular question was asked about funds going to a particular institution. Beyond that, and whose account and whether, I am not entertaining that in this debate. I agree with you, it's a matter of public interest. It might even be determined to be a question of national interest, but it can be taken up elsewhere and not in this debate. And that is my ruling.
May I continue, President?
You can continue to address the legislation. Don't continue about account and who for account and who talk to you and who don't talk to you.
Mr. President,
deal with that on your talk show.
With due respect,
deal
my
with that
freedom of speech is not going to be muzzled in this.
No, but it's a question, Senator Brown.
I am prepared to continue.
Senator Brown.
I am prepared to continue if you allow me, sir.
Senator Brown, it's not a question of freedom of speech. You have freedom of speech, but you have freedom of speech within the terms of
Mr. President,
of the standing order.
Am I being allowed to continue to address the...
But are you going to allow me to finish what I'm saying? Nobody is stifling your freedom of speech. It sounds good. I have freedom of speech. Yes, you have freedom of speech within the terms and conditions. Within the terms and conditions of the standing orders, good sense, common decency, and within the terms of the law. You don't have freedom of speech to say anything where you want to say, in which part you want to say. That's not what freedom of speech is. Your freedom of speech in here is confined within the terms of the standing orders.
Only... President, Clause 4 of the bill reads as follows. Clause 4 of the bill reads as follows.
I remember referring, Senator Morris.
President, are you going to allow me to speak or are you going to talk away?
Senator Morris, I remember once, on one occasion, I remember of a previous Senate, when I referred to a colleague on the other side as Bring, B-R-A-Y, Bring. You call me to order, you know, and say I shouldn't refer to the person's presentation as Brain. Now a member of your side has referred to my intervention as squealing. But I notice you don't say anything about that.
No, since I did, Brain is specific to a jackass. Squealing is specific to those or that which can make a sound. So human beings squeal, and certain other animals squeal. So that therein is the difference.
Thank you very much, Senator Knight.
Yeah.
Senator Brown.
And
Senator
I am
Brown.
not saying that brain.
Senator Brown, please continue. Thank you, Minister Charles, for guiding me
President,
there. Let's go.
Clause 4 of this bill says, on the commencement date, any monies held in any bank account in the name of or standing to the credit of the Petro-Carib Development Fund shall be credited to the consolidated fund to be applied in the payment of any liability of the Petro-Carib Development Fund which arose before the commencement date. 6D speaks to all records and data of the Carib Development Fund passed to the Minister with responsibility for finance on behalf of the Crown. If there are data and records that may be helpful to the Minister of Finance, how can it not be my duty to highlight those so the Minister of Finance may not be shortchanged? When I deal with the issues I'm dealing with the provisions of this bill. 6B says the liability of the Petro-Carib Fund, including a share of liability immediately before that date, become by the force of this section the liabilities of the Crown. Does CMU have a liability to the Petro-Carib Fund? That's what I am pursuing. And then I sought to see if kickbacks have been taking place with money from the CMU, the Petro-Carib Fund. You say everybody know the name of the people, so I won't call any more name. But suffice it to say, Mr. President, that it is important to the Minister of Finance and to the country that we know who got money from the CMU that came through the Petro-Carib, and who would have the liability, to the extent that liability exists, to pay back that money to the Minister of Finance. And they know why they fired the Minister of Education. They haven't told the country. And the country is finding things out day by day. And we know a lot more. So, let us be clear.
Hold on a minute. Senator Morris, you really said that?
I never said that the president wanted to come over and show me. I said they. So, I leave it at that.
Mr. President, all the amount of time taken from my look at 30 minutes, I'm going to get them back, sir? Because all of these interruptions. Mr. President, you didn't hear that? You heard that? About the time that has been taken from my presentation, but I'm going to get it back.
That's what they call it, waste time?
Because every time you bring the corruption out, they call it waste time. Every time you expose the thiefiness that took place in the Ministry of Education.
Mr. President.
Because this sheer thievery of the Petro-Carib money that has taken place in the Ministry of Education.
Point of order, Mr. President.
Senator Brown. I have a point about it.
Mr. President, if again, Senator Brown would read and understand, because there are two different issues that he's seeking to raise. They are raising two issues that are separate. And he's not being relevant to Section 6, any aspect of Section 6, because the liability of the Petro-Carib and any liability of CMU are two different issues.
There's no point out.
They are two different issues, so it is not relevant. It is not relevant.
To the best of my recollection of the standing orders, the determination of whether an intervention is a point of order or not still remains with me.
We're advising. Final.
The point of order being raised is the question of relevance, which Senator Brown is well aware of. Say something?
Just to Mr. President, we're talking about Section 4 of the bill, and it says any liabilities of the Petro-Carib Development Fund, any liabilities of the Petro-Carib Development Fund. My understanding is that the Ministry of Education in this instance, yes, the point is that it is out of order.
Would you respond to me, please?
To call.
Would you respond?
I'm responding to you, Mr. President. It's out of order to call the Ministry of Education that the Speaker has not identified as owing any money to Petro-Carib. He calls CMU, and therefore the focus in accounting should be the party that owes Petro-Carib, and that party is CMU. No MAID, no Ministry of Education. It is the CMU. So let's stay with it.
Thank you.
It's part of the Ministry of Education. Yeah, dogs. They're accountable to the ministry. You're going to make it worse, you sir.
Mr. President,
CMU is an independent body.
the CMU is part of the Ministry of Education. And it's important to know whether or not that money is owed to the CMU. Because if money is owed to the Petro-Carib Development Fund, because if money is owed to that money should go to the consolidated fund. And the question is, who must pay it back? Who must pay it back? Mr. President, let me be clear to you. The people out there want to know, whether the National Education Trust, got any of this Petro-Carib money. But what is clear is that there's a tangled web that has elsewhere been described as a cesspool of corruption that is taking place with an agency that has taken money from the Petro-Carib Fund, Development Fund. And that's what I am interrogating. What is the status of that money? And how that money was used? Well, it was used to the best interest of the development of our country.
So Mr. President, in this debate here now, you want this minister to answer that? Mr. Brown, you're gone again,
Mr. President,
just, I beg, I'm interceding with you. Just proceed and make your contribution without doing what you exactly know you ought not to do. Relevance.
You know, Mr. President, what is relevant to some people, like exposure of corruption, to others with interest, oftentimes it is of no interest.
No, man, my view of relevance only relate to how I interpret the standing orders. It don't relate to any personal interest I have in anything.
Mr. President, let us be clear. Let us be clear. A part of my interest as a senator is to clear the name of Doreen Miller. Others may have other interests.
A point of order, Mr. President.
Others may have other interests.
A point of order, Mr. President.
Because a wrong has been done to her.
A point of order, Mr. President. Mr. President, I believe, Mr. President, that you have ruled already as to the relevance. I'd like to just remind this Honourable Senate of our standing orders and draw our attention to clause 35 of our standing orders that speak to the need for members to confine themselves to the subject under discussion. Haven't you already, Mr. President, ruled on the irrelevance of the kind of presentation that Senator Brown is making? I'll ask again that we confine our presentation to the subject before us. Also, Mr. President, there are comments that are repeatedly being made. And we understand that in the thrust of our debate, there will be remarks made so that people can score points. But, Mr. President, the remarks that are being made by Senator Brown are not only bordering, but very clearly being made to impute a certain kind of improper.
To who? Improper what? To who?
On the government of Jamaica.
Some member will you fire?
And I think, Mr. President, that where these things are irrelevant and some of them inaccurate, we'll ask that they not only be confined, but that he be subjected to not being able to make that kind of remark. I ask for your protection.
Senator Brown, you know, you got up and said a while ago that it is your purpose in this debate to clear the name of Doreen Miller.
Yeah,
and I am going to rule, right? Listen to what my ruling is. In relation to that aspect of your presentation, if you return there, I'm going to bring your presentation to a close. And you can talk about me muzzling, gagging you, doing anything you want to do. If you return there, I'm going to call on the next speaker.
Mr. President, you have power. You have power, but I don't know if the authority also follows that power. But let me move on. Mr. President, I don't need to engage you on this, because more issue will come out later on. So don't worry, we know a lot.
No, but Mr. President, he actually does have to
move
I made
on.
a ruling.
But a point of, no,
No,
but
we
we
have to
actually,
move on.
our standing orders demand that he does engage on this. And where a ruling has been made, Mr. President, and disregarded,
But
there are certain things that can be done under
You don't
Section
have to
43 of our
remind me
standing
of what
orders.
my authority is.
Hold so nervous. Hold so nervous. I read enough of you.
All the time I'm cut out of my
I
time.
wonder if any money went to the council for catering.
The Speaker's time having expired, Mr. President, we ask that he be allotted the requisite time to complete his presentation.
The Speaker's time has expired. The question is that the Speaker be given time to complete his presentation. All in favor? Against? Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, this $208 billion that is going to accrue to the consolidated fund. We need to ensure that some of it is spent on improving the consular service, so that what happened to our fishermen recently don't happen again. Well, we must improve the consular service so when people are held under ICs and before trial, they can get.
Mr. President, again, the issue of relevance. The issue of relevance arises in this. In the debate and the comments being made by Senator Brown. Mr. President.
The President have to cap on.
Senator Brown,
I rise at a point of order to say that Senator Brown.
The fishermen and you intend to start with the issue of the fishermen?
Come on, man. Come on.
Mr. Senator Brown, I am going to ask you to stick to the legislation that is before you. No. You need to do it. Let me tell you, look here. Let me tell you something. You need to deal with the issues at hand.
Mr. President, I don't know if you have read the bill. The bill talks about putting money, $208 billion of Jamaican, into the consolidated fund.
What's wrong with that?
And I can't talk about how that money should be used. How can that be? And if that is how you want to shut me down, shut me down. But I must be entitled to talk about how that money is going to be used.
So, a point of order, Mr. President. Mr. President.
It may hurt them. It may burn them.
Mr. President.
It may embarrass them.
A point
but
of
don't
order.
Shut me
Mr.
down.
President.
Don't muzzle me.
A point of order. Mr. President,
Sorry, one minute.
You go open it up. You is who the contractor general says shouldn't sit on a government board, much less a deputy president of the Senate. That's what the contractor general said about you.
General, shut you down. Shut you down.
Oh. You got the break. Wait. The president seems to about to make a...
Senator, Minister, you're on your feet. I'm sorry, I was just looking at something.
Mr. President, I had earlier made reference to specific areas of our standing order, which have been put forward for this Senate so that we can have a smooth and orderly flow of our presentations. What Senator Brown persists in doing is in disregarding the authority of the chair and the president, and in doing so continues to carry this Senate into areas that have already been ruled as irrelevant. Mr. President, I'm not going to be calling yet for 43-4.
Call him. Don't wait.
Don't pity.
I am not going to
We don't beg it.
Call, man. That's not nobody over here.
Mr. President, I am not going to be calling yet for section 43-4, which permits you to treat with persons who are persistently and willfully obstructing the Senate. But I do ask, Mr. President, again, that we bring our attention to 43-1, where you have called the attention of the Senate to the conduct of a member who persists in irrelevance.
What is irrelevant?
In his own arguments.
Come on.
That you may direct the member to discontinue his speech or, Mr. President, to resume his seat. And I ask, Mr. President, that you be guided in that regard.
Thank you, thank you, Minister. Senator Brown, you going to continue?
I want to find out, you see, for this debate and in going forward, if in debating a bill, if a member should see it fit to make reference to a particular clause, and in this particular instance, when it comes on to public expenditure, question the use of the funds.
How that is average?
Mr. President, question the use of public funds in the debate, if that constitutes a violation of the standing order. I would want to find out if you are ruling that the questioning of the use of public funds in the context of the debate is a violation of the standing orders. I would want to know.
Senator Morris, you know very well the answer to that. There is no issue that a member can question the use or how funds are expended. But you qualify the answer yourself, or you identify the answer yourself within the context of the debate. And I have ruled in relation to some aspect of Senator Brown's Senator Brown's presentation, and he's now going on to the fishermen. No doubt he will get to the ship rider agreement. And I'm bringing to the attention of the leader. I'm bringing the attention to the attention of the leader of opposition business. Standing Order 43-1. I'm bringing that to the attention of the leader of the opposition business, and I'm not going to interrupt Senator Brown again, other than to rely on section 43-1. So you can continue, Senator Brown.
Mr. President, must I read that as a threat to my freedom to raise an issue of all money? I'm asking a question of the President. I'm asking a question of the President.
No, because what
you have a point of order?
Yes.
What is it?
Again, Mr. President, raise a point of order because in these introductions that Senator Brown makes, in his great experience as a long-standing senator, he utilizes that run-up to simply repeat the things that you have already ruled as irrelevant. And that, Mr. President, then, maybe not in his direct submissions, but in all that he presents to the country, repeats again things that you have already ruled on. I ask, Mr. President, that you confine him, not only in his general submission, but even in that introduction that he continues to do.
Senator Brown asked a question as to whether, by referring to this section, it was a threat. I merely brought it to the attention of the leader of opposition business, and I'm not interrupting him again. If you choose to interrupt, if you choose to interpret that as a threat or as guidance from the chair, you decide what you want to do.
So in giving that guidance, Mr. President, am I allowed to raise, and I'm asking this with all sincerity, am I allowed to raise the potential use or lack of use of the $208 billion that you're asking me to advise and consent to? Oh, Lord God.
An apology.
What is this? President has lost control of the Senate?
Other way.
The speaker, Senator Brown has just asked if I've lost control of the Senate. I'm going to invite you to continue and you will find out.
Side has taken it on as the leader of opposition business in the Senate. I ask them now to restrain themselves while I deal with this matter.
I read it because I read money. What if it costs really not going to cost?
Do I have your attention, Mr. President?
Mr. President, I was trying to take a point of order when the microphone was giving trouble. A question was raised which could mislead the people of the country as to whether or not money had ever gone from Petrocarib to NET. I have a list of the donors.
No,
it was raised by Senator Brown earlier, and I'm taking a point of order so that people are not misled.
He's not the minister.
Because it was misleading. A misleading statement was made earlier in Senator Brown's presentation. I am pointing out to it. It would have misled the people of Jamaica. No money from Petrocarib went to the National Education Trust by way of any donation or payment.
We don't know in what capacity Senator Samuda is answering that question. Senator Brown, answer the question. Hold on. No, you is.
Senator Skeffrey.
The question was directed to the minister.
What is the point of order?
No, in what basis he's providing the answer to that question. It was directed to the It was directed to the minister.
All right, so
I don't know in what capacity Senator Samuda is answering that question. So if he has the answer, furnish it to the minister, and in closing the debate, the minister provides the answer. That's how the debate goes.
Thank you, Senator Skeffrey. Senator Brown, continue.
You just get up, everybody get up and answer.
So, Mr. President, again I ask your guidance. Am I going to be permitted to speak to all the 208 billion Jamaican dollars which will go into the general budget of the Jamaica, increasing it by 26%? Am I allowed to speak about how that fund may be used to the development of our country? I'm asking you that, Mr. President. I don't want to run afoul of your 43. So could you guide me on that?
So you touch the fish thing in trouble.
I'm seeking your guidance.
You have never taken any guidance that I've given you before.
Not
so
true.
why
Not
are you
true.
seeking it now?
Not true.
Deal with the legislation before you that is relevant and make your submissions relevant. And once they are relevant, nobody is seeking to muzzle you or deny you your right to speak on behalf of the people of Jamaica. But my authority gives me the jurisdiction to deal with questions of relevance, and that's what I've put before you.
Mr. President,
and you know exactly what you're doing.
Mr. President, I've sought your guidance. You have failed to give it to me. Let me make it clear. The $208 billion will accrue to the consolidated fund. That is money that they will be able to spend. And I'm going to ask, given the experience recently of 5 Jamaicans, will money be put in that area to protect future Jamaicans like those fishermen? I'm asking that. Now, if that you want to name me, so be it. I want to ask also, because what happened to those fishermen pain my heart, to sit in a Senate and to see how they were abandoned by their government. Mr. President?
Senator Brown is misleading the House. There is no evidence that Jamaican government had abandoned the fishermen. I suggest you ask him to withdraw that statement.
Mr. President, may I continue? Because the minister said to me that between arrest and trial, there was no consular service. That, in my opinion, is an abandonment. And between the trial and deportation, there was no concrete information that could be given. That, in my opinion, is abandonment. Mr. President, let me move on to another point.
Yes, Mr. President. If you read the Hansard of a previous sitting of this House, you would have had the benefit of the Minister of Foreign Affairs outlining the process that engaged in relation to the fishermen who are now having a case against the U.S. Coast Guard. And in that outline, the Minister was very clear that there was interaction between the consular service and the fishermen before they came to Jamaica, and also that the fishermen made no reference of any abuse while in the custody of the U.S. authorities. I suspect that you may want to guide the member of the irrelevance, inappropriateness, and misguided approach that he's taking in relation to this matter.
Mr. President, I'm not going to be drawn out by any neophyte into what was said. Why not? The answer speaks for itself. Mr. President, how much time points of order are going to be raised here?
You are free to cancel. You are free to cancel. Is that a correct term? Check the meaning of it. Check the meaning of it, guy. You are. You are. Not a bad word. You are. Me, I hope you. I am fat and I'm proud of it. You think I take offense? No. I won't be offended.
Call me the one. I won't be offended because I am. And I love myself.
You never say nobody from himself here.
The media.
You are trying, but you know. Spend some more time and study how to.
Mr. President. Mr. President, your eyes closed. I know you're not sleeping.
So you are.
I assume that your lack of response to the noise from that side meant that it's not a point of order sufficient to prevent me from continuing. Mr. President, this $208 billion can be spent corruptly or can be spent for the good order and development of Jamaica. I pray that it is not spent in the way I see some of the money from the consolidated fund in which this is going to go and pass to the Ministry of Education have been spent. I hope that's not the way. We've been down the road where we have had a significant sum of money, the Capital Development Fund, for example, and in the end, it's wasted on housekeeping matters, and the development of Jamaica has not taken place. I wish to propose that just as we have EPAC, a special board of broad stakeholders be appointed to give guidance and advice to the use of this large sum of money, 208 billion Jamaican, so that it may be used entirely for the development of Jamaica, to build our capital stock and not to feed greedy ministers, their boards and their courts. What I have seen, when I look, for example, firemen working out there without the proper gears, will any of this money be used to assist them to get proper gears as the summer heat comes on and they have to fight fire? Will any of this money be used for that? Will any of this money be used to settle the workers at the National Solid Waste Management Authority, Senator Williams, so that they can be paid early? I want to know, because nobody has told us. Nobody has told us what is going to happen to these issues. But I'm confident, Mr. President, that unless we find a system to keep a close eye on this $208 billion, it could be wasted. As Christine Lagarde from the IMF said, don't flush it out, don't make it a slush fund for elections. Let's use it for the enduring and sustainable development of Jamaica. It is on that basis that we will support it. But Mr. President, I would be remiss if I didn't say to the citizens of our country that watching what happened with the $600 million debushing money, watching Petrojam, watching Nesal, that this money could go down the drain. This money could go down the drain. Because I've seen two ministers separated for at least mismanagement, and based on what some people are saying inside the parliamentary chamber, at least one could very well.
Mr. President, a point of order. I don't want the member to speak without me saying it, and I think he understands that it is not appropriate. There were earlier in the discussion, the names were called, streams of investigation mentioned. Now, he is insinuating at least names of persons in wrongdoing. That is not the function of this chamber to convict anybody, and I am raising it as a point of order. It's a dangerous trend.
Senator Brown, under section 43(1), it is my ruling that you discontinue your presentation and resume your seat.
Mr. President, if it is your desire to run a parliament where the majority muzzles the minority, do that without my presence.
Next speaker.
Mr. President, the Commissioner of Police has said a minister is under criminal investigation. That's what the Commissioner of Police has said. A minister is under criminal investigation.
Senator Brown.
For the benefit of the persons who may have an interest in this debate, for the many persons who watch this debate on a weekly basis and who take an interest in the proceedings of the Senate, you would have noticed that during the course of the debate, I drew the attention to Senator Lambert Brown, who was making a presentation on behalf of the opposition senators in relation to a bill entitled a bill to amend the Petroleum Act, that he repeatedly refused to deal with the bill under discussion in a relevant manner. And I had occasion, and many may say, that I have been extremely lenient to bring to his attention the fact that his presentation was not being relevant. On the last occasion, under section 43, I brought to his attention and to the attention of the leader of the opposition business the following: the president or chairman, after having called the attention of the Senate or of the committee to the conduct of a member who persists in irrelevance or tedious repetition, either of his own arguments or of the arguments used by other members in the debate, may direct that the member discontinue his speech and resume his seat. And that is the standing order that I invoked to ask Senator Brown to cease and desist. What has happened now is that all the members of the opposition Senate, including the leader, have walked out and are not prepared, it appears, to make any further contribution to the business of the day. The Senate has a quorum, and the business of the Senate will continue. Minister?
Mr. President, I crave your indulgence.
Thank you. And in fact, perhaps I won't make the observation, but maybe this was the intended.
Well, I was about to indicate, Mr. President, that though unfortunate, I did in my point of order raise reference to 43.1 as well as 43.4, and just to indicate to those who are watching that you are quite lenient in relying on 43.1, and that 43.1 does not call on the opposition to walk out. That is of their own volition. That regard, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Minister. Senator Webby, and you have my...
Thank you very much. Thank you very much,
you
Mr.
have
President.
You have my permission to speak from a seat other than your own.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before I start my presentation, read the bill at hand, I would just like to say, Mr. President, that I was first selected for the Senate by the Honourable Bruce Golding in 2007. I served 2 years. Again in 2016, I was asked by the current Prime Minister, Andrew Holness, again to sit in the Senate so I can contribute to my country. And it was clear that I was a private sector rep and an independent rep in the Senate. I would say in all my time in the Senate, a total of about 4 years now, Mr. President, today, what I've experienced is the most disappointing day in my life in the Senate. I am really, really disappointed in terms of my experience this morning, and I leave it at that. I'll say something else also, Mr. President, and I know I have the support of my colleague senators, certainly on this side. Anyone in our country, especially those that are selected, as we are as senators, or elected by the people of the country, must be held accountable to the full extent of the law. Anyone. It is a serious breach of trust to the people of Jamaica. And I will leave that again, Mr. President. Mr. President, now at the bill at hand, I want to rise in support of the Petroleum Amendment Act 2018, which really seeks to reintegrate the Petro-Carib Development Fund into central government. And you know, Mr. President, despite of what is being said by my colleagues over that side, but I think it's worth repeating.
Senator, just address me. You don't have to discuss anything that was said. The members have left, you know.
Okay,
so they're not interested in hearing what you have to say. So
all
you
right,
just
so
address me and the people of Jamaica.
Good. Understood. So, Mr. President, I think it's worth repeating that Jamaica has had a strong relationship with Venezuela dating back from 200 years when the Jamaica letter was received by Venezuelan liberator Simon Bolivar. Mr. President, a lot has been said about the Petro-Carib Fund, and I think it is worthwhile for me, Mr. President, to share a little bit more detail in terms of the exact arrangement, because there is some amount of misunderstanding based on the debate that I've heard so far. So, Mr. President, the amount financed from each invoice, the interest rate and repayment period was determined based on the prevailing price of the Venezuelan oil. When the price of oil, Mr. President and colleagues, exceed US $40 per barrel, between 30 and 70% per annum. In the event, Mr. President, that the oil fell below US $40 per barrel, between 5 and 25% of each invoice would be financed over 17 years at 2% interest rate per annum. Mr. President, I don't think, without any doubt, we can all agree that the facility is an excellent one. Mr. President, we should also note that the Petro-Carib Agreement, Senator Charles, is still in force. For approximately, it should be noted, Mr. President, for approximately 3 years, Jamaica has not lifted any crude or product under the agreement. Let me repeat that, Mr. President. For approximately 3 years, Jamaica has not lifted any crude or product under the agreement. If flows were to resume within a settlement environment, associated loans would be received by the government of Jamaica through the Ministry of Finance. I want to congratulate, Mr. President, the established corporate governance structure of the PDF. And I think it's appropriate, colleagues and President, that we recognize and thank the staff of the Petro-Carib Fund for the excellent and hard work that they have done over the last 13 years. I want to single out Dr. Wesley Hughes, who at one stage he was the chairman of the fund, and I think later in the life of the fund he became the CEO. Dr. Hughes managed a very large pool of funds, and I think it's appropriate that we recognize him for the excellent work that he has done. Mr. President, the previous speaker mentioned it, that it was a part of the IMF agreement, and he's correct. It was a part of the April 2018 consultation report on Jamaica, which actually required the integration of the fund into government central operation. But the truth is, colleagues, President, that this strategy of reintegrating the Petro-Carib Fund into central government, it really forms part of the government's overall policy to rationalize the public service, to create greater efficiencies in the use of public resources. This is being done through mergers of government bodies, divestment of state-owned agencies, and to review the size of the public sector to ensure it's nimble and efficient. The divestment of the Wigton wind farm to the Jamaican people is the most recent example of the implementation of this policy. Mr. President, I have indicated on many previous occasions my support for the implementation of a central treasury management system, which is crucial and critical in proper cash management, financial forecasting, and debt financing in the public sector. I have seen in a number of public sector companies where one company is running a high overdraft and is paying the bank huge amount of interest, and another company has cash on their balance sheet and is earning very little interest. This again, the Petro-Carib Fund being reintegrated in central government will assist for a more efficient government. Mr. President, when you have an efficient government, as we have been saying in this Honourable House, we would have more fiscal space to spend on health, education, and welfare programs to improve the quality of life on each and every Jamaican. This bill, therefore, is one step to achieving this outcome, and it has my full support. Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes. Any other speaker?
Yeah.
Minister?
Mr. President, I'm grateful and I thank you, colleagues, for your contributions, even in your absence. Mr. President, just to, in conclusion, reaffirm that the integration of this Petro-Carib Development Fund into the Ministry of Finance and Public Service is critical. It's critical as a commitment under the standby agreement with the IMF. And, Mr. President, it is important within the function of our public financial management, as has been reiterated by Senator Webby. Mr. President, I would like to just, in closing, make reference to one issue that was raised as it relates to CMU, and to indicate, as was commenced by my colleague Senator Samuda, that there are inaccuracies in the presentation that was made by Senator Lambert Brown while he was in the House, referring to an allotment that was allocated to CMU. And without going into specific details, Mr. President, I can indicate that any allotment to CMU would have been a representation of CMU as a conduit to give support for social development support to other schools. And so the inference or the imputation that there is some kind of unusual or nefarious allocation that was made in that regard is misleading and inaccurate. Mr. President, well, as I said, Mr. President, it is also critical for us to reaffirm that the government of Jamaica, this administration, has been consistent in our efforts to support any measure that will lift up transparency, accountability. We have also, Mr. President, been consistent in our efforts to ensure that we improve efficiency of the mechanisms that will lead us to this promise of economic prosperity. Mr. President, let us not be naive or foolish to believe that along that journey there will be no hiccup, pothole, or otherwise. What is important is to record for the history of this country, Mr. President, that this administration, this Prime Minister, the Most Honourable Andrew Holness, has been determinative and decisive in ensuring that the country and its people are always protected. Mr. President, I want to, before I ask for us to move to committee stage, but the prospect for any improvement in the inflows appears to be unlikely, Mr. President, given the clear outlook on Venezuela's economy and the sanctions that we all know that have been imposed by the United States and other governments as well. So, Mr. President, we have to ask the question, who do we in this Senate consider our responsibility number one? And for us, we intend to maintain our strong friendships and relationships and to always do whatever we can to demonstrate clear and coherent protection for the people of Venezuela. But it must be understood, our priority rests with the people of Jamaica. And as we seek to ensure that our friends also achieve prosperity and are protected, our responsibility in this Senate and in this government is to make sure that we take the steps that will protect the people of our country. Mr. President, there have been also references to liabilities of the fund, and I think that in the lower house, the issues as to the liability of the fund and the 95 billion owed to the government of Jamaica, 56 billion to public bodies, 100 billion in investments and 15 billion to Venezuela has been delineated, that has been detailed, and that is in the Hansard for all to read. And so, Mr. President, in that regard, and with all that has been said, I thank my colleagues for their contributions, and I ask that the bill be read a second time.
Thank you, Minister Charles. The question. Thank you, Minister Charles. The question is that the bill be read for a second time. Those in favor?
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Petroleum Act by repealing Part 3A in respect of the integration of the functions of the Petro-Carib Development Fund into central government and for connected matters, read a second time.
The Senate will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate to consider the bill clause by clause. Thank you, members. I put clause 1. Those in favor?
Aye.
I put clauses 2, 3, and 4. Those in favor?
Aye.
I put clauses 5, 6, and 7. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? I put clause 8. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? The question is that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendment. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? Thank you. I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendment. Minister?
Mr. President, I now ask that the bill be read a third time.
The question is that the bill, an act to amend the Petroleum Act, be read a third time. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? Madam Clerk?
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Petroleum Act by repealing Part 3A in respect of the integration of the functions of the Petro-Carib Development Fund into central government and for connected matters, read a third time and passed.
Minister, thank you. You had indicated that you intended to do an act to amend the Bauxite and Alumina Industries Act, Encouragement Act. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Proceed, please.
Mr. President, colleagues, the bill before this Honourable Senate today, an act to amend the Bauxite and Alumina Industries Encouragement Act 2019, seeks to amend the Bauxite and Alumina Industries Encouragement Act with a view to 1, reviving the lapse provision, Mr. President, giving to the Minister the power to make orders granting concession on the importation of fuel oil to recognized bauxite and alumina producers in the bauxite industry. Secondly, Mr. President, it seeks to provide the Minister with the power to have such orders be given retrospective effect. Mr. President, Section 1 of the Primary Act accords recognized bauxite producers concession on fuel oils, except petrol, which they import for the mining of bauxite and the production of alumina. Sections 7.2 and 7.3 stipulated the prescribed period within which this benefit could be derived as November 1, 1979 to December 31st, 1996, which is the prescribed date, or such other date as the Minister may by order prescribe. Mr. President, because the sector has been identified as a key contributor to national development, in 1997, the government of Jamaica determined that to ensure that the bauxite and alumina industry would thrive, the Act was amended to allow the Minister by order to extend the prescribed date, subject to an affirmative resolution of the House of Representatives, so that the industry would continue, Mr. President, to benefit from the concession. Mr. President, the last such order was issued on July 1, 2015, extending the prescribed date to June 30th, 2018. Mr. President, when attempting to further extend the prescribed dates by order, validity was sought from the Attorney General's chambers based on the previous comments from the Office of the Chief Parliamentary Counsel, who confirmed that the prescribed date could continue to be extended by order under the Act. However, By the time that the requisite feedback was given, Mr. President, the timeline to extend the order would have lapsed, which meant that an amendment needed to be made to the Act to reinstitute the concession. Mr. President, in contemplating whether the amendment would be made to the Act, consideration was given as to whether the bauxite sector was still in need of the support provided by a concession being given on the importation of fuel oil. After consultations, colleagues, Mr. President, we determined that the concession was still needed to this industry to allow it to remain operational. The concession somewhat offsets the efficiency losses associated with aging machinery and plants and the industry players. Because of the decades of concession, they would not have budgeted also for the additional expense in their own operational plans. Mr. President, consultations and subsequent amendments to the Act also support the need for the Minister to be able to retroactively give effect to any orders done, subject to an affirmative resolution of the House of Representatives. And this would prevent the possibility of any future order expiring, and would also, Mr. President, allow the Minister more latitude whereby he or she could suspend the benefit at any time that he or she believes the sector is not in need of the support, but then reimpose same at a later date if the conditions, Mr. President, were to change. The proposed amendments, I'll give a summary rather of the proposed amendments, Mr. President. Amendment is proposed to section 4, 5, and 8 of the Act. Clauses 2, 3, and 5 of the bill.
4, 5, and 8
of the Act.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes. Clauses 2, 3, and 5 of the bill, which is what is before us, amend the references to schedule in the Act so that the word first will precede the word schedule, as the Act is likely to have an order prescribing the period as a second schedule. Amendment to section 7, that is through clause 4 of the bill, where the current section 7, Mr. President, is deleted and replaced with a new section 7, which removes the limitations on the date for the order and provides the Minister with general powers to make, amend, or revoke orders to prescribe the relevant concession period. It also, Mr. President, provides the Minister with the power to give such orders retrospective effect where required. The Memorandum of Objects and Reasons, Mr. President, states that the decision to amend the Act is to grant the bauxite sector duty concession on fuel oil from the first date of July 2018 to the 30th of June 2023, to authorize the Minister to grant by order a new relevant concession period subject to affirmative resolution of the House of Representatives where the period for doing so has expired, and to give retrospective effect to an order made under section 7.2 of the Act. Mr. President, I will now seek the support of the members of the Honourable Senate in passing this bill, which we have titled, and is titled rather, an Act to amend the Bauxite and Alumina Industries Encouragement Act 2019, and to approve the amendments that have been tabled, subject to any further amendments that might be considered based on presentations from my colleagues. I thank you.
Thank you, Minister Charles. Senator Gale.
Mr. President, as a representative of workers in the bauxite industry, I am compelled to raise a contribution towards this debate. And when I look at the memorandum of objects and reasons, what this is suggesting, it's a government intention to secure and sustain a viable industry. The bauxite industry, Mr. President, is one of our highest earner of foreign exchange, a single precious resource of non-service activity. It is a major economic activity, especially in rural Jamaica. Mr. President, it has created massive economic spin-off with employment creation, savings, and community development. And there's absolutely no question, Mr. President, in terms of the importance of its importance to the economic landscape. So it is an important industry that as an administration we must secure and sustain. Mr. President, notwithstanding concerns raised recently by environmentalists in recent times, we must find a way to strike a balance. We don't need to confront with the environmentalists. Proper management systems must be put in place to protect the cockpit country. And Mr. President, I was very pleased, extremely pleased, when citizens in and around that area raised concerns and our Honourable Prime Minister responded. We don't need a fallout. We don't need a fallout with no one with respect to this industry. A fallout, Mr. President, could be significant in terms of foreign exchange earnings and employment and even mere commercial activities in communities. So we have to be responsible as a government to ensure that there's absolutely no fallout. And so we need to take measures and steps to preserve the industry so that we can have at least more decades of mining taking place. Mr. President, another critical area around the industry that I want to raise is those lands that have been mined out. I believe that there must be some increased efforts to restore these lands to productive use. Farming and even utilizing some of these lands to create housing solutions. This government has embarked through the National Housing Trust in creating housing solutions that has never been seen before. And with the challenge that the trust has in identifying lands, some of these very lands can be utilized to create housing solutions. Mr. President, there's also the question of pollution control and its health effects. And I want to point to the role of the Bauxite Community Development Program because it's key. I've seen where in St. Elizabeth in recent times with the operation of GISCO that residents have raised concerns relating to pollution. And they have a right to raise the concerns. What I have a challenge with, President, is where political officials, including former ministers, have gone down there to create protest. You don't need protest in that situation. What you need, Mr. President, is a situation where the companies work with the communities to reduce and to minimize and to eliminate the hazards. So I'm suggesting that it is the right time where the community development program is put into high gear. Mr. President, bauxite and alumina on the world market is facing challenges. The price for alumina is sometimes not in sync with even the production. Today, the LME price is at $17 per ton. For a company to be effective, it requires in and around $20 to $22. So it's moving in the wrong direction. And I can just imagine when a plant starts its operation and the production cost is not in keeping with the price on the LME. And so it provides challenges for these organizations. It provides challenges for these companies. So, President, when the government decides to grant the bauxite sector duty concession, it's an effective means of ensuring that there is support for these bauxite companies. And so it's a commendable. My only hope, is that it's for 5 years. And I'm hoping and anticipating, Minister, that the minister in charge at the next time around may want to consider extending the period from a mere 5 years to more than that. President, this is an important industry, and future prospects can be favorable, providing that efforts are continued to attain higher levels of efficiency. The following steps, Mr. President, are necessary for the viability. Fuel efficiency. Fuel efficiency. Once there's a startup of any operation and any of these companies, the cost for fuel can drive down your productive cost. For those who treat with the manufacturing of alumina, the caustic soda efficiency, the use of caustic soda can be improved to the best possible level. And President, we have to, in this operation, move to the conversion from oil to natural gas. Because what that does is that it reduces the energy cost, but not only reduces the energy cost, it improves the environment conditions. Mr. President, I'm calling for all these companies in operation that they seek to create expansion of the plant's operation, at least as best and as practicable as possible to maximum capacity. Because there's a challenge, once you reduce your operation to a low capacity, it impacts on the workforce. And so we want to ensure that the thousands of workers in the bauxite industry remains in employment. Yes. Remains in employment. And it's also key, Mr. President, it's also key that we must keep the plant's technology up to date. So maintenance of the machinery is important. One of the challenges, some of these plants are old. And so they are operating with old machinery and all parts. And when those parts malfunction, it might be difficult to replace them because they are no longer in stock. Yes. So it's important that the plants utilize the concessions that are given here to reinvest and retool, and not just to use it at any peril.
Yes, good point. Good point.
Mr. President, as long as people need buildings, aeroplanes, automobiles, trains, power lines, soda can, Senator Longmore, file paper, as long as these are needed.
So why you never refer that observation about file paper to Senator Webby? Why you pick on Senator Long?
No, because guess what? Senator Webby has to sell it for Senator Longmore to purchase it. Mr. President, the role of bauxite in this country has done a great deal for our development. In creating employment, in training professionals. Many professionals today were the recipient of scholarships from bauxite companies. The building of communities. The building of communities. Mr. President, many parishes were developed out of bauxite. The Manchester, the St. Elizabeth, the Clarendon, parts of St. Catherine and St. Anne and Trelawney and its environment were built out of bauxite. There are some other parishes, Mr. President, that weren't that lucky. And so I am pleased with the announcement that the Prime Minister made with future infrastructural development in St. Thomas. Because it is in my view that the government has now stepped on the gas, pressing towards prosperity. And so I believe that it is a good year for the people of St. Thomas. Good year. A good year for the people of St. Thomas. Okay. So, Mr. President, I'm very much in support of the intent and objects of this piece of legislation. And I would want to encourage that as a government, we need to find other ways to which we can create catalysts for the sustainability and the improvement of the industry. May it please you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Gale.
Son.
Senator Samoud, a long time we haven't heard from you. Welcome. Just come back from farm.
Yes, sir. It was quite fruitful. Mr. President, I wish to add my voice of support to the bill before us. But despite the unique circumstances that face us in this debate, I think it is important that some things are added to the record of the Parliament. When we get bills from time to time like this that span across agencies and ministries, and sometimes the information that you want to justify your support or lack thereof is sometimes challenging in bringing it together because it doesn't reside in one space. This bill is appropriate, and I'll start with one One point of slight disagreement with my colleague, Senator Gale. I actually support the 5-year period that the bill outlines for the minister to make considerations. And I'll explain why as I go through my notes here. Because, certainly even though... Take it now. Even though those are not here, I don't want to be accused of reading as opposed to speaking from my notes. Competitiveness of the industry is at the core of the reason why this concession must be made. But when concessions are going to be made, the questions that the public naturally will ask and should ask, and all stakeholders and certainly all of us in here should ask, is what's the value of the concession? In this case, because it is mining related and use of Jamaican lands, what's the value and size of the lands being employed? What's the number of direct and indirect employees? And what's the value of the contribution to our economy? In this case, there's some information that the public should take comfort in terms of why we're making the decision. And that information includes the fact that the total output of this industry by way of bauxite and alumina is $1.2 billion, Mr. President. The industry currently employs, and most recent information suggests, 4,029 persons by way of direct and indirect employment. And the output by way of total bauxite mined in 2018 would be 10 million metric tons, split between 3.3 million crude and 6.7 million to produce 2.5 million metric tons of alumina. This is nothing to scoff at, Mr. President. This is a massive industry that has a huge economic impact on this nation. It employs people, and it is one of the industries and pillars of development. And as the country is working towards prosperity, it is important that we have no hemorrhage in any area of our economy. However, our Prime Minister in 2016 would have said, there can be no economic prosperity, or rather, there can be no economic development through a process of environmental degradation. There can be no prosperity through pollution. So it is important that residents, when they raise concerns, are given the appropriate forum and the appropriate research and environment impact assessments are done to ascertain the true impact of the work that is being done in the areas of concern. But it is important. The contribution to the country is enormous. But the citizens of the country should also have no doubt that this government is, and pun intended, the greenest government since independence. And I say that against, sorry? Environmentally green, of course. And, just to be clear. But, Mr. President, I say that against a backdrop and a litany of environmental achievements and positions that have been taken by this government that haven't been easy. I refer to decisions like implementing the cockpit country boundary established after 40 years of malaise to protect us. I refer to the 14 new forestry orders that would have been passed in this very Senate in the latter part of 2016, I believe it was, or early 2017. Now, why these are important, and it's not one of the, the big news-making items, between the cockpit country boundary and what we would have done with the 14 forestry orders, Jamaica's protected area by way of its land space against deforestation is 30% of its landmass. Now, why that figure is important is that the UN standard and target is 15%. So Jamaica's protected area doubles that of the global target. And that was done by this administration. So we are protecting. This government is protecting its environment, Mr. President. I speak about the 11% of our near-shore environment, which is now protected. And I speak about the commitment given by our Minister of Environment to get us to 20% by 2025, which is again ahead of international standards, Mr. President. Now, it's easy to pass regulations and it's easy to pass laws. There was a long-standing attempt which couldn't seem to get off the ground and couldn't get launched, which recently became a reality. Again, something we took out of the pipeline and made happen. It was the launch of the National Conservation Trust, Mr. President. And why that body is important is because legislation without the ability to implement or to enforce goes nowhere. So the National Conservation Trust is responsible for financing this mechanism. Now, additionally, parish, we can. Parish development orders, Mr. President, which govern how we allow development to take place in this country, have been outstanding and stuck for longer than I have been alive. The fact is, Mr. President, the ones that are not finished are open for comment currently in parish libraries and in municipalities and right across, I think even in post offices. We are nearing completion on something that has been outstanding and that has led us to many of the issues we have, Mr. President, and it is something this administration should be very proud of, because that is what will insist that you have adequate sewage and water supply where things are beaten. So it is sustainable development, Mr. President. We have taken, and this is important and why I mentioned the 5 years, Mr. President, this government has taken two very difficult decisions. Many difficult decisions, but two that I specifically speak of today. You see, it's not easy for a country with a per capita GDP of little over 5,000 US to turn down investment. It's not easy. We are behind in some of our human development indicators from where we would want to be. And it takes money to move us forward. It takes investment and growth. So when the government of Jamaica turned down a proposed investment for Goat Islands because of the environmental impact, it is nothing to scoff at, Mr. President. When the GOJ further turned down interest in a coal-powered plant, which would make energy more cost-effective and make us more competitive, it was not an easy decision, Mr. President, and one to be applauded. And it is specifically because these tough decisions must be made from time to time why I appreciate and support a 5-year review for how your concessions are granted, Mr. President. Because the idea must be that we won't always be inefficient with our fuel supply and in terms of cost. So there will come a time, hopefully, where we can remove concessions in that sort of space. But Mr. President, and I won't take us too much longer, the fact is the GOJ has taken tough decisions as it impacts industry. We have taken tough decisions as to how we will manage the problem of plastic pollution in this country, Mr. President. So we have shown that we will not cowardly allow the environment to be degraded in the pursuit of economic prosperity, but we will defend and protect our environment so that our children and grandchildren have the benefit of it. So bauxite is important, Mr. President. It is an important pillar of our economy. So too, and more than equally so, is our environment. And what this does is it ensures that there are review periods, Mr. President, for such concessions. And what I would like to close in saying, Mr. President, is that there are reasons citizens have, in many cases, distrust in governments. There's reasons, and they're right and fair, and they should. It keeps democracy going for citizens to question their government. But the environmental record of this government should be sufficient to remove cynicism and distrust in the actions as it relates to our protection of the environment, Mr. President. And in that I close with my support for this bill.
Minister? Minister? Oh.
I crave my colleagues' indulgence, Mr. President. Yes, as we seek to close, might I just remind the Honourable Senate, firstly, I thank my colleagues for their contribution that have all been valuable and substantive, and I thank them for the support as it relates to the bill. And in closing, before we move to committee stage, I just remind the country, Mr. President, that what we seek to do here is to amend the Act so that it will grant the bauxite sector the concession on fuel oil up to June 30th, 2023, authorize the Minister to grant by order any relevant new concession periods subject to affirmative resolution, and give retrospective effect to the order based on Section 7.2 of the Act. It's very important, Mr. President, and I think that it is worth highlighting and repeating that the government seeks to have this judicious balance in driving this important industry forward, which of course has been highlighted for its worth in terms of employment and in driving the economy. But that as we do so, as we take one step forward, we also take several steps forward to protect our environment. And that judicious balance, Mr. President, is summed up in this government's thrust towards sustainable development. Our sustainable development thrust is demonstrated, Mr. President, in the more than 90% alignment between our National Development Plan, Vision 2030, and the planet's Sustainable Development Plan, Action 2030. That proves that Jamaica is on the right track. That said, Mr. President, I ask that the bill be read a second time.
Thank you very much, Minister. The question is that the bill be read for a second time. Those in favor? Aye. Against?
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Bauxite and Alumina Industries Encouragement Act read a second time.
The question is that the bill be read. We did that. The Senate will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate to consider the bill clause by clause. Marshall? Thank you very much. I put clauses 1, 2, and 3. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? I put clauses 3, 4, I put clauses 4, 5, and 6. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The question is that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendment. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendment.
Mr. President, I ask that the bill be read a third time.
Thank you, Minister. The question is that the bill be read for a third time. Those in favor? Against? Madam Clerk?
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Bauxite and Alumina Industries Encouragement Act read a third time and passed.
Minister, I think that you have
I have a recommittal, Mr. President, and I crave your indulgence in that regard, and I ask a recommittal of the notices of motion given orally to enable you to refer the attached 2 NHT orders to the Regulation Committee of the Senate for early consideration and support.
Okay, first of all, the question is that the item referred to by the Minister be recommitted. Those in favor? Aye. Against? Okay, Minister, if the item is recommitted, just repeat what you're saying.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the Senate, I will move the following 2 motions. Be it resolved that the National Housing Trust Housing Benefits, Longville Park Housing Development Phase 2A, Order 2019, which was laid on the table of the Senate on the 31st day of May 2019, be referred to the Regulations Committee of the Senate for consideration and report. Further, be it resolved that the National Housing Trust Housing Benefits Marysfield Housing Development Order 2019, which was laid on the table of the Senate on the 31st day of May 2019, be referred to the Regulations Committee of the Senate for consideration and report. Mr. President, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take these motions.
Thank you very much, Minister. Go ahead, Minister.
Yes, Mr. President, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the two motions, notice of which I gave earlier.
Thank you very much for the motion. Those in favor? Aye. Against? Minister.
I now ask that the two motions be approved, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. The question is, as put by the Minister, that the two motions previously read into the record be approved. Those in favor? Aye. Against?
Mr. President, as smoothly as proceedings have been operated today, it is still important for me to record for the Hansard and for all Jamaicans watching us my sincere disappointment. Disappointment, Mr. President, that the opposition, in whom is placed a significantly important responsibility, took a decision, not compelled, but of their own volition, to abandon the Senate and to abandon their right to make a valuable contribution as we seek to do public business. They have a duty to the people of Jamaica. And it is important that we do not, Mr. President, at any time allow for that demonstration to be seen as defending rights. Mr. President, the standing order, as it was referred to, calls on us to honor the Senate and the people and to respect authority. Without that, we as leaders, chosen, selected, would be doing such a great disservice to the youngsters and others who observe us on a weekly basis. Mr. President, for the many Jamaicans that are watching us today, they will consider that walkout to be staged. They will have to know. They will contend. And I say so with no intention other than to be very, very clear that they will now have to ask themselves, where does your loyalty lie? Mr. President, I want to reiterate my concern for the persistent behavior, and not just because it obstructs the flow of the Senate. Because, Mr. President, we must acknowledge our responsibility. 21 of us are chosen by the leaders of this country not to come here and play around and grandstand for political reason, but to make sure that we are the upper house, the review chamber, the platform that is expected to provide a higher level of standard of delivery of service. Mr. President, it is for that reason that I specifically I'm compelled to call on my colleague Senator Brown to apologize to you directly at the next sitting. Mr. President, my comments cannot be taken in any other way than being genuine. Anyone that watches the Senate knows. Mr. President, the belligerence that is being uttered from our colleague and the persistence in disregarding your authority is reflective of the problem we have in this country with law and order. We are not in a position in Jamaica to play around. It is time for us as senators to understand our responsibility and take it seriously. Mr. President, the authority that is vested in you is one that demands and commands respect from anyone that chooses to sit in those seats or these. And as long as I stay here or any of my colleague senators, we will not allow anyone to obstruct our Senate, to disrespect our President, and to disregard the standing orders. Mr. President, today is not a day that will be recorded as reflecting the best that can come from our Senate. But there is a reason why we continued the work. Not just because we had an opportunity to not be challenged, but because we must show that whether you want to stay here or not, the work of the people of Jamaica must continue. It is bigger than any one senator, any government, any opposition. We are here for a reason. Mr. President, with those words, I don't consider that there's any further business to be done in this Senate today, and I ask for the suspension of the Senate until a date to be set next week.
The question is that the Senate be adjourned for a date to be fixed. Those in favor? Against? This Honourable Senate now stands adjourned.
Hi, I'm Evelyn Williams-Mills, Jamaica 400 champion, and you're watching PBCJ People's Station.